Good evening, everyone. I hate to break up the good conversation, but hopefully the program will more than make up for it. Welcome to Georgetown University for this timely event on how to hold Russia accountable for war crimes in Ukraine. I'm Elaine Verveer, and I direct the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. We are so proud to co-host tonight's program with the Embassy of Poland and the Vital Voices Global Partnership. I want to welcome members of the diplomatic corps who are with us. Certainly, for starters, from Ukraine, the counselor at the Ukrainian Embassy, Katarina Smagli. Welcome, Katarina. Welcome to the ambassadors of Ireland, the UK, and Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Deputy Chiefs of Mission of Cyprus, Malta, Portugal, and embassy officers from Denmark, Austria, Georgia, Japan, Italy, Estonia, Switzerland, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, the EU, and Finland, I think all friends of Ukraine. So welcome all. And to the representatives of the United States government, excuse my voice, that cold season is here. Thank you. Well said. Especially women's voices, right? So representatives from USAID, the State Department, and Treasury, and very especially to the students at Georgetown from Poland and Ukraine. And we have a sizable number here. It has been almost 2 years now since Russia mounted its full-scale, unprovoked assault on Ukraine. The invasion is the largest attack on a European country since World War II. And it has brought enormous death and destruction to Ukraine and her people. Civilians continue to be directly targeted in abrogation of international rules of law. Children are killed when Russian missiles hit a classroom, hit a playground, a child in a stroller, a newborn in a hospital. 3 generations are obliterated when a missile hits an apartment. A 96-year-old man who survived a Nazi concentration camp dies from a Russian shell. This happened, and it is continuing to happen. I had conversations with some of our Ukrainian friends this morning on Zoom, and they were dealing with more missile attacks. Russia also uses another weapon in its arsenal against Ukraine. Sexual violence is being used systematically and openly. Those attacked have ranged in age from 4 to 80. In our work with women of Ukraine, focusing on them as critical leaders across all of society, we have also focused on their leadership in documenting the systematic use of sexual violence. And tonight you will hear from the Nobel laureate, Alexandra Matvichuk, on the challenges posed by this violence. Moreover, Russia is engaged in the forced kidnapping of Ukrainian children. The transfer of children is ruled an act of genocide in the Geneva Convention. And in March, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant against Putin and his Children's Rights Commissioner. War crimes such as these, crimes against humanity, genocide, need to be recognized for the crimes that they are, and the perpetrators need to be held accountable. Ukraine is also calling for a special international tribunal for the crime of aggression to bring the top war criminals to justice. This is the reality that Ukraine continues to face. What is the way forward? How will Russia be held accountable? A word on tonight's program. First, we will hear brief remarks from distinguished leaders, and then we will watch a documentary based on accounts from witnesses to Russian war crimes collected by the Raphael Lemkin Center for documenting Russian crimes in Ukraine. The film is called TENETA. We will then hear from our panel of experts who will make us much smarter on these critical issues and hopefully more engaged. With that, I now turn to His Excellency Marek Majorowski, Poland's ambassador to the United States. The ambassador is ably substituting for Foreign Minister Sikorski, whose trip to the United States was postponed. But we're delighted to have the ambassador with us. Please welcome him.
Distinguished guests, good afternoon. First and foremost, let me express my heartfelt gratitude to our partners, the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security, Vital Voices, and personally to Ambassador Milan Verver and Elise Nelson for their commitment and generosity, as well as to the staff of the Polish Embassy here in Washington, D.C., who have worked so tirelessly over the last couple of months to make this conference successful. Let me also extend the warmest welcome to all panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, let me start with a brief jaunt into the past. Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his bunker. Joseph Stalin died in his bed, as did Pol Pot, the Cambodian tyrant. Nicolae Ceausescu, the authoritarian ruler of communist Romania, was summarily executed by a firing squad, nevertheless without proper trial. Josef Mengele suffered a deadly stroke while swimming in Brazil, exactly 45 years ago to this day. Adolf Eichmann's fate was, in fact, an exception. The mastermind of the final solution was snatched in Argentina by Mossad operatives, then flown into Israel, and subsequently tried and sentenced to death in Jerusalem. Fast forward to 2024 and the ongoing war in Ukraine. Evidence of Russian war crimes is ample and compelling. However, collecting and securing it is, with all due respect, the easy part. Particularly in times of permanent surveillance and continuous digital exposure. To put it cynically, we do have the tools to monitor up close the atrocities carried out by Russians in Ukraine, but we have very limited capabilities to hold them accountable. Ladies and gentlemen, as you may have read in the papers or in social media, a famous American journalist is in Moscow these days, and as we speak, he is probably editing and uploading his interview with President Putin. I believe that all of you would prefer the Russian president to be interviewed by a judge in The Hague instead. And I truly hope that someday we will get there, ideally without the necessity of abducting Mr. Putin in Argentina. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now turn it over to Elise Nelson, President and CEO of Vital Voices Global Partnership. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you so much to Milan and the incredible team here at Georgetown for working with us and putting together this really important gathering. So for many of you who don't know Vital Voices and you're not familiar with our work, we were founded 27 years ago on a simple but powerful idea that no country could expect to move forward if half the population, women and girls, were left behind. But in our last 20 years of work with more than 20,000 women around the world, across 185 countries, we've actually learned that unless countries have peace and prosperity and justice, in order to have those things, it first requires not just representation of men and women, but participation of women, women at the highest seats of power to call for peace. Vital Voices has been working with women in Ukraine since our founding days in 1997. In fact, Ambassador Verveer will remember when we first arrived at the first Vital Voices conference in Vienna, Austria, in 1997, a group of grandmothers came up to Milan because, of course, she speaks Ukrainian, some, and they told her about a problem that had no name, and that problem was human trafficking. and the rise of gender-based violence as the country was opening up. And we got to work immediately at Vital Voices, then part of the US government, and now as a nonprofit working with those leaders. And what they did is they built a network of Ukrainian women leaders throughout the country. Now fast forward 25 years from that day, that network is alive and thriving. And with the full-scale invasion by Russia into Ukraine, that network of women leaders lit up. They stepped up. We know that certainly many women and girls and children fled to the borders for safety, but others, like this network of 8 different women's organizations in every region, they stepped up, they stayed. They expanded shelters from 60 people to 600 people within a week's time. They stepped up. But when I was out to visit them last summer, they told me something extremely alarming. And that was that in a moment's notice, they reacted, they responded, they built this infrastructure. But actually, of the billions upon billions of dollars that 6 months later started to flow in to help, less than 1% was going to women-led organizations. And here's the thing. Dictators, warlords, autocrats, they've got one thing in common, well, maybe a few things in common, but one of the big things they have in common, their biggest fear, is powerfully organized women. And that is what we have seen. With only a little bit of funding, they've been able to make extraordinary things happen with great care and great empathy, but with tremendous courage. I'm so thrilled that Ambassador Gupta is here because she and her team partnered with us to build upon that initial work. And last year, we started an initiative to train police officers, governments, other NGOs to be able to recognize sexual violence. Because when I was there over the summer, I kept hearing, well, maybe there's about 100 cases. I'm like, 100 cases? That's all? Well, it's because people didn't report it. So Nadia Murad, another great Nobel Peace Prize leader, created something called the Murad Code. And that is about centering survivors, their stories, and deciding for themselves what justice looks like. It may not look like being, on a stand and repeating and being re-traumatized. It may look very different. But that is what that is about. And what we hope to do over the next year and years to come is continue to document these horrific acts of sexual violence. So we will be there with that documentation and ready for what these survivors tell us they want us to do with that information. What we know certainly is that the violence was perpetrated by Russian soldiers. But we know that it will be women who will stand up and fight for justice. Around the world, I truly believe that the stakes have never been higher. We have to hold perpetrators accountable in every country around the world if we are going to have justice anywhere else. We know that women lead differently. Even in times of crisis, they bring innovative solutions to the table. And more often than not, that is because they are the people who are closest to, most greatly impacted by the crisis. I now want to turn it over to a steadfast partner. I'm honored to introduce a woman who has been working to safeguard justice, stand up for women's rights, and all the many, many things in between. Please welcome Her Excellency Oksana Markanova. Oh, she's not here. Sorry. Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson, for your kind introduction. I'm not Ambassador Oksana Markarova. Your Excellencies, Ambassador Verveer, Gupta, and Marek Magirovsky, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the honor of the introduction. My name is Katya Smagli, and unfortunately, Ambassador Markarova couldn't be here because we have quite a hectic day on the Capitol Hill, which still requires her attention on some other urgent matters. She's in constant dialogue with the president and our government, so as much as she wanted to be here with us today, she couldn't attend. But On her behalf and on behalf of the Embassy of Ukraine in the United States, let me thank very sincerely all co-organizers of today's event. First and foremost, Georgetown's Institute of Women, Peace and Security, our dear colleagues from the Embassy of Poland in the United States, and of course, Vital Voices Global Partnership. You, of course, know that the month of February is a very special and tragic month in our history as we get closer to the second mark of Russia's illegal and unprovoked attack on our country, and 10 years since they first attacked us after illegal annexation of Crimea and causing conflict in the eastern part of Ukraine. Just today, our friends in Ukraine, our sisters, brothers, our husbands were again subject of horrific attack, missile attack. Russia killed another 5 innocent civilians and wounded 30. Although our air defenses shot down 44 missiles and drones out of 64 launched by Russia, a lot of civilian infrastructure has been destroyed and unfortunately many people lost their lives. And all of this on a day when the European Union Foreign Policy Chief, Josep Borrell, is visiting Ukraine and Kiev. So mass killings, rapes, torture, filtration camps, illegal detention of civilians and children became a crude reality again in the 21st century. I do not want to keep these remarks very long, but this event gives me a wonderful opportunity to thank our strategic partner, the United States government, our strategic partner, the Polish government, for providing all the necessary support as we take steps to keep Russia accountable for its war crimes. Much has already been achieved on the legal front, yet we are just at the beginning of the process of a very long legal track. We are very much looking forward to seeing the documentary film TENETA and thank the Raphael Lemkin Center for committing Russian crimes in Ukraine for doing all its work in support of our legal experts to ensure accountability of Russia's for its crimes. We are deeply grateful to all our partners, and I have an extreme pleasure of introducing Her Excellency Geeta Rao Gupta, Ambassador at Large for the Secretary's Office for Global Women's Issue at the U.S. Department of State, to the microphone.
Thank you very much, and good evening to all of you. I want to particularly extend my gratitude to the Polish ambassador and the embassy, to Vital Voices and the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security for organizing this timely event and for inviting me to be a part of it. And it's a true honor to join you all tonight. The people of America and the people of Poland know the importance of supporting our friends and allies in times of need. During America's Revolutionary War, I'm taking you way back, Polish patriots lent their military expertise and heroism to America's struggle for freedom. In 1982, at the height of the Cold War, President Ronald Reagan declared January 30th to be Solidarity Day, a moment to express support for the people of Poland, called for an end to martial law, and honor Solidarity, the historic popular movement for democracy in Poland. It is no surprise, then, that the United States and the Republic of Poland are now working together to support Ukraine and her people, a nation fighting valiantly to defend its freedom and independence against a foreign aggressor. We stand together in solidarity with the Ukrainian people in support of democracy, the rule of law, human rights, justice, and accountability, because we know that the evils of authoritarianism and unchecked aggression often impact society's most vulnerable and must be defeated. From the start, Russia's war of aggression has been characterized by atrocities committed by its forces against the Ukrainian people. And this war, as all wars tend to do, is falling hardest on the backs of women and children. We cannot turn away from the atrocities and abuses committed against Ukrainian women and girls, particularly the conflict-related sexual violence committed by members of Russia's armed forces and their proxies, and by Russian occupation authorities in Russia-occupied parts of Ukraine. As President Biden stated, we have not forgotten the mass graves, the bodies, found bearing signs of torture, rape used as a weapon by the Russians, and thousands of Ukrainian children forcibly taken into Russia, stolen from their parents. Crimes against women and girls are too often underreported and ignored or forgotten in the larger context of conflict, despite their prevalence and devastating impact on not only the survivors, but also their families, communities, and entire societies. We're proud to be here today with two champions for women's rights, vital voices in the Georgetown Institute of Women, Peace, and Security, to ensure international attention remains focused on this systemic issue and to reiterate our support for comprehensive, survivor-centered, trauma-informed justice. As part of this effort, the United States is committed to elevating the voices of brave journalists and activists, such as Bianca Zalewski of Poland. Last year, the United States was proud to recognize Bianca's tireless work to shed light on Russian aggression in Ukraine and to document evidence of war crimes to the Polish authorities by awarding her with the International Women of Courage Award. The United States strongly supports pathways to justice and accountability for atrocities committed in Ukraine and against its people. We support a range of international investigation and inquiries into war crimes and other atrocities in Ukraine and against Ukrainians. The Secretary's Office of Global Women's Issues that I have the honor of leading is championing efforts to ensure gender equality is integrated throughout these accountability mechanisms. We do this work because we're striving to build a robust ecosystem to better prevent and respond to conflict-related sexual violence and other human rights abuses and war crimes against women and girls. One positive impact from these efforts includes a nearly $2 million program funded by my office to support survivors of conflict-related sexual violence and other forms of gender-based violence in Ukraine. This project advances survivor-centered approaches to justice and accountability by providing survivors and local gender-based violence service providers with a range of capacity building, reintegration, and psychosocial support services. It also works to enhance the capacities of national authorities and institutions to deliver survivor-centered services and ensure that the needs and perspectives of survivors are meaningfully included in peace and justice processes. On a broader level, the United States is promoting accountability in Ukraine by supporting efforts of the International Criminal Court's prosecutor, who received an unprecedented referral by 43 states parties last year. This includes the expert missions under the Moscow mechanism of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. In addition, the United States will continue to support Ukraine's Office of the Prosecutor General via the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group for Ukraine. This is an initiative established by the European Union, the United States, and the United Kingdom in partnership with the government of Ukraine to support Ukraine's efforts to ensure justice and accountability for atrocity crimes committed in the context of Russia's full-scale invasion. Justice for conflict-related sexual violence is a key component of the ACA's work, and the United States is also supporting the National Police of Ukraine, which is leading investigations into more than 100,000 potential war crime cases. The United States also continues to empower organizations to collect, preserve, analyze, and disseminate open source, comprehensive information that can be used in national and international tribunals alike in order to hold accountable those responsible for some of the most hideous war crimes and crimes against humanity that we have seen in Ukraine. Finally, let me be clear. The first step to holding Russia accountable for the horrors it has visited on Ukraine and her people is ensuring its war of aggression is met with defeat. For this, Congress must act. Friends and foes alike are watching what we do and will draw lessons about American power and resolve. And in order to achieve sustainable peace, the women of Ukraine must be front and center. Women's participation before, during, and after conflict is critical to achieving lasting peace. The facts speak for themselves. Studies show that a peace agreement is 35% more likely to last at least 15 years if women are involved and women's meaningful participation at all levels of decision-making leads to better and more sustainable outcomes for all people. That is why we promote the Women, Peace and Security agenda, which calls for increased women's leadership and participation in the political and security sector. My office is actually working in close coordination with civil society and our partners to connect with women on the front lines to understand what they need and support the elevation and amplification of their voices. We're doing this in Ukraine. More specifically, we are supporting Ukraine's recently updated Women, Peace and Security National Action Plan, which highlights the importance of recognizing women as vital actors in the war and their contributions to the future recovery of the nation. As the United States continues these efforts to support the women of Ukraine and all of the Ukrainian people, we're fortunate to have a stalwart friend and partner in Poland. More than most nations, the Polish people recognize that when dictators do not pay a price for the wars of aggression, they cause more chaos, death, and destruction. The cost to America and our allies and partners only rises if this threat is not met. It's important to remember that the cause for justice will not end on the battlefield. We must be ready, organized, and motivated to work for justice for the victims of Russia's unconscionable brutality in the years to come, including the women and girls who are disproportionately devastated. Thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss this vitally important topic. It is now my distinct privilege to introduce Alexandra Matvichek, a woman leader herself and a steadfast champion of human rights and civil liberties, to provide brief video remarks. Thank you so much.
Since the large-scale invasion started, we faced with unprecedented amount of Russian war crimes, because Russia uses war crimes as the methods of warfare. Russia attempts to break people's resistance and occupy Ukraine by the tool which I call the immense pain on civilian population. So we are documenting not just violations of Geneva and Hague Conventions, we are documenting human pain. And we face with a accountability gap which has two dimensions. The first problem is that there is no international court which can prosecute Putin, top political leadership and high military command of Russian state for the crime of aggression. But all these atrocities, which we now are documenting, it's a result of their leadership decision to start this war. And this is a common logic. If we want to prevent wars in future, we have to punish the states and their leaders who start such kind of wars. And this means that we have to create a special tribunal on aggression and hold Putin and his surrounding accountable. And second dimensions. The war turned people into the numbers because the scale of war crimes grows so fast that it becomes impossible to recognize all the stories. But we must return people their names. We must provide justice for all victims of this war. I work with victims affected by this war directly, and I know that people see justice very differently. For some people, justice means to see their perpetrators behind the bars. For other people, justice means to know a truth, what happened with their beloved ones. For some people, justice means to get compensations, and without this, they will feel unsatisfied. For another people, justice means a possibility to be heard and to have a public recognition and official recognition that something which happened with them and their loved one's family is not just immoral, but illegal. So it's our task to create a comprehensive justice strategy and appropriate justice infrastructure to fulfill all these different types of needs, because the life of each person matters.
We'll now be privileged to watch the documentary TENETA. We're going to talk a little bit about the way forward for accountability. And I'm going to begin our discussion with Magdalena Gawin, who has come to us tonight from Warsaw. She is the director of the Pulaski Institute and Raphael Lemkin Center for documenting Russian crimes in Ukraine, and they were responsible for this film. The Institute is the first institution in Poland to systematize thousands of testimonies and witness accounts of Polish citizens from the period of World War II. Let me ask you to start. A recent UN report laid out the evidence of torture and sexual violence that's being committed in Ukraine. We also know about the forcible kidnappings. How are these crimes, so much of what we saw in this film, being documented so that there can be accountability for the perpetrators?
Firstly, thank you very much for organizers to invite me and us for the conference. It is a great honor to be here with you. You asked me about a very important question, and I must say a few words about myself and how the idea to set up Lemkin Center appeared very shortly after the invasion of Russian Federation against Ukraine. And first of all, 5 years before the aggression, we started to popularize legacy of Raphael Lemkin. And so we were well prepared, and we spent, at least me, about 12 years, but my colleagues, my friends from Pulaski Institute, we deal with the history of the Polish testimonies given to the prosecutors after the Second World War in post-war time, and Jewish as well. And we also signed an agreement with the archive in United States of America. And thanks to that, we obtained agreement to obtain 30,000 testimonies from Soviet occupation. And the general conclusion was that all the testimonies who were given to the prosecutors, they will be classified for long, long decades. Believe me that some testimonies in 2014 who were given in post-war time documenting German crimes given by eyewitness or by the victims were still classified. And there is one fundamental question: how we can keep memory about the nature of invasion and not even military conflict, but occupation. I mean, I'm asking about the faith of civilians. And all the memory is built on the testimonies given not to the prosecutors, but given to the different institutions. And when Putin attacked Ukraine at the time, we knew about it. So very quickly, 2 days later, I decided to set up Lemkin Center and to gather testimonies in 2 ways. In Poland, from refugees, from Ukrainian refugees. I remember my first visit in small town Brok, 2 days after the invasion. And I remember that the first wave of Ukrainian refugees completely didn't see the war because they ran away so quickly. I was very disappointed. But everybody wanted to testify. And the second way is to gather testimony on a spot, I mean on Ukraine, from deoccupied territories. And now, as you see on the film, now we have a larger collection of recordings, about exactly 648 records from interview with the eyewitness or with the victims of Russian soldiers. And my friends in Ukraine, they reached to those territory who are deoccupied after the 2 weeks on 1 week. So it's very, very early testimonies. And I think that is very important because one of the disadvantages of many testimonies that they were put too late, 30 years later, 40. We also try, and from the beginning, to rather omit well-known towns or cities like Kiev or like Bucha. I'm sorry, but Bucha is full of journalists, and everybody asks civilians, about the crimes. We rather prefer those places where prosecutors couldn't reach and where is a problem also with the documented crimes. And for example, now we are preparing a report about Andriivka. Andriivka is a very similar place, not far from Kiev, like a Bucha, but the inhabitants, there is no middle class, there is no well-known person, and they have substantial problem to reach and to speak about the occupation. They are ordinary people and peasants. So we gather more than 80 testimonies from Andriivka. The second report will be about Lipivka, about the Green Corridor, as we call it. It was a trap deliberately organized by the Russian soldiers because they ordered people to evacuate and then starting shooting. And it's very detailed story. Family after family, car after car. We have hundreds of photographs and also interviews. And then we're also preparing a report about sexual abuses and about sexual crimes. And let me back to my experience as a historian. During the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, German soldiers with their collaborators committed terrible crimes. They killed about 150,000 inhabitants of Warsaw, but also committed a mass rapes. We have hundreds of testimonies from Warsaw Uprising, even more. But guess how many we have proved testimonies that women were raped? 5. 5. And we knew that it's very poor documented war crimes. And is the question why? Because this is the special war crime which very strongly stigmatize not only victim, believe me, but also next generation. And because of that, we were well prepared for that, and we interviewed 70 women from Ukraine because we visited 11 regions in Ukraine, like Donetsk, Kramatorsk, and the others. And the women came from different structure, social structure. The oldest is over 70 and the youngest is 12 years old. And we do everything to protect their identity. We never mentioned even the place when they used to live and they testified. And we also blurred faces. I was asked many times by American journalists why we do it. And sometimes it's very difficult to explain them that some Ukrainian families are divided. Some of them could live on the occupied territories. The other also can live in Russia. We must be very, very conscious. Sometimes we met with a situation when women ask us, I want to reveal my face. I want to reveal, to show my identity. I would like to be a leader of those women who were harmed. But also we should be very cautious because the victims could change its mind. And in an area of social media, if we reveal face or identity, the subsequence, the results are irreversible. So, and we're preparing the first report. It is the second report about the sexual crime on Ukraine, and I brought the report with me. The report would be presented in the second anniversary of the outbreak of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and we faced with many, many problems because we documented not how people were tortured, not how they were killed, because it's relatively easy to show public opinion what happened, but with the most intimate issue. And because we couldn't put the photographs, we asked Ukrainian artist Serhiy Zakharov to draw very moving graphics which illustrates what happened in Ukraine. And what is the conclusion from this report? This report will be prepared in 3 languages, in Polish, in Ukrainian, and in English. Now it's preparing only in 1 version, but my friends from Lemkin Center are still working on it. What is the general conclusion? If you are thinking about sexual crime on Ukraine, first of all, we associate it with the chaos, with the wildness, that the poor people just rape women, Ukrainian women. No, we're wrong, absolutely wrong. In my opinion, analyze all the details and the story of 70 women we tackle with a deliberate decision and deliberate strategy to tackle with a conquered nation. Women, Ukrainian women, the whole Ukrainians were treated as a traitor of Russia, traitor of Russian nation. But Ukrainian women were treated in special way as a double traitor. And very, very often we meet with the situation when women were ordered to put off the clothes. They were standing by hours among Russian soldiers. Russian soldiers forced them to repeat, I love Soviet Union. I love Soviet Union. No, louder. I love Soviet Union. And it was the radical form of humiliation was connected with the interrogation at the same time. The most drastic story is about 12 years old Ukrainian girl. She was raped many times by a Russian soldier. At the same time, she was blackmailed that she couldn't speak about it, and then she was pregnant. And what I would like to say at the end, I just ending. Every day, we watching television and we saw picture from the war. In fact, we are able to saw very, very small part of the reality of the war and occupation in Ukraine. We observing the battlefield, but we don't know what happened on the occupied territories, and we know very little about the occupied land. Thank you.
Thank you. So documentation is clearly critical in all of this. I want to turn now to Mr. Nima Inia, Special Advisor to the United States Ambassador at Large for Global Criminal Justice. He previously worked as a prosecutor with the International Criminal Court and the International Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. And listening, I was remembering with the Bosnian women, the courageous women who testified in The Hague and really led to the crimes being documented and then punished against the perpetrators. So,
and the still testimonies are classified because I asked about it.
Yeah,
still classified.
But they were extraordinarily important to what happened. So, you have represented over 100 victims and 30 Afghan human rights groups before the ICC and more. Let me ask you a different kind of question. When we were listening to Alexandra Matvichuk, she talked about how important to Ukraine it is to have a special tribunal for the aggression that the Russian leaders have perpetrated. My understanding is the United States doesn't favor an international special tribunal, but favors an alternative. Can you discuss that with us?
Sure, thank you so much. First, thank you to the organizers, the embassy for the Republic of Poland here in the United States, to the Vital Voices, and obviously to the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. And thank you, obviously, for your amazing work in terms of what your organization does, collecting information and documenting it, preserving it not just for purposes of justice, but also for maintaining the memory of victims, their families, and preserving that for future generations. Because I agree with you fundamentally that that aspect of maintaining history is not just something that is essential for organizations like the ones that I worked for, the ICC and other tribunals, but obviously for maintaining a history that can last beyond those institutions. So my office, when it takes a look at justice and accountability, does so from the lens of 5 pillars, of which the crime of aggression is one. And I'll just tick along those for a moment and then get to the core of your question. Now, the first of those is obviously supporting international institutions like the International Criminal Court, but also the Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine and the Moscow Mechanism. And at the end of 2022, Congress passed a bipartisan legislation that allows the United States for the first time to support the ICC in its investigation against Ukraine. And we have been actively utilizing that legislation to do so, including currently thinking through ways in order to provide substantial financial assistance to the court, particularly as it relates to witnesses and victims. The second pillar of our strategy is in relation to supporting Ukraine and the Office of the Prosecutor General in its investigation and prosecution of international crimes. Because as we saw earlier today, there's over 100,000 cases which that office is investigating. And through our platform, the Accountability Advisory Group, which Clint is leading and will speak to, we provide $20 million to support capacity building for the OPG in its investigation and prosecution of those crimes. Because we know that domestic efforts are often the front lines when it comes to justice and accountability. The third of our pillars is supporting civil society organizations in strategic litigation and in documentation. And I frankly don't need to say more than that, because you've heard the substantial value and significance that work does in terms of shedding light for what happens to victims, but also providing an essential component of the ecosystem of international justice. And I think Ambassador Gupta noted the effort that her office does in this regard, demonstrating that this is truly a whole-of-government approach as it relates to supporting civil society organizations. The fourth of those pillars is really one that's aimed at closing any impunity here at home, that is here in the United States, because we know that people travel. So last year, at the end of last year, the Department of Justice here in the United States announced for the very first time the utilization of the war crime statute, bringing criminal prosecutions against members of Russian-backed militaries. And at the end of 2022, Congress authorized amendments to the war crime statutes to prevent any individual who comes to the United States who is accused of war crimes from finding safe haven here on our territory. And we are actively pushing to close further gaps, by pushing forward a crimes against humanity legislation that would criminalize crimes against humanity here in the United States, and that would be the first. And then finally, to the question that you've asked, the crime of aggression, which is obviously considered by many as being the core crime here, since all other crimes flow from Russia's war of aggression. And unlike other crimes, like war crimes and crimes against humanity, the crime of aggression recognizes that everybody is a victim. Every soldier who has had to fight, every house that has been destroyed, because the very character of the conflict is unlawful and is differentiated in that regards. There, our office is honored to support the investigations that are being done by the International Center for the Prosecution of the Crime of Aggression, which is housed under Eurojust. We have seconded a prosecutor from the Department of Justice. We are the only non-EU state to have done so. Our office has given $1 million to the ICPA. We are, again, the only non-EU state that has done so. And we are privileged to also participate in the core group amongst the very small non-EU states who are there to establish and set up a special tribunal on the crime of aggression. Now, to your specific question, in it is fundamentally the case that it is the voice of victims that we must hear when it concerns what kind of justice to establish, but also what justice looks like. Because as we saw in the video that was displayed today, they're the ones whose family members have been lost. They're the ones whose homes have been destroyed, whose lives have been uprooted. And while many of us have the privilege of sitting in rooms like this, many, many, many miles away from what violence can unfold, it is them that we must listen to, obviously, when designing organizations and institutions like a special tribunal. With that in mind, we were privileged to be invited by Ukraine to participate amongst the 40 states in the core group. And when we joined the core group, we were asked to bring technical and legal expertise to understand and to contribute to the development of a special tribunal. And at the time, there were two options on the table for consideration and for evaluation. One was the establishment of a special tribunal that would be done so through a United Nations General Assembly agreement or mandate. And then the second would be one where it would emerge from Ukrainian judicial institutions and, in particular, its own territorial jurisdiction over the crime, because it is the victim state, and obviously it has the strongest legal basis by which to exercise jurisdiction over the crime. And in evaluating these two proposals, we took into consideration two issues. Obviously, the political considerations for establishing an institution, and then obviously the legal considerations and in particular the legal construct of such an organization. And it was through that process of evaluating that we determined that the United Nations General Assembly would neither be a pathway that is legally available for establishing a court, but one where we did not believe politically there was a possible viable way of establishing a court. And in my personal opinion, the opportunity of going through the General Assembly is one that is probably more difficult now than it was even before. And the worst thing that can happen, and the best thing for Vladimir Putin, is if an action was brought before the General Assembly that failed to establish a court. So with these considerations in mind, we opted for supporting and arguing for the establishment of a court that emerges from Ukraine's unquestionable and unassailable jurisdiction over the crime. But knowing the critiques that would emerge of a Ukrainian-only institution, we, as well as members of the G7, pushed for one that would be internationalized so that there would be no question as to its legitimacy, credibility, and independence. So an institution that would emerge from Ukraine, but whose judges, whose prosecutors, whose investigators, whose financial backing, and even the rules of procedure that it could apply, emerged from the international community, but that was also supported by international and regional resolutions welcoming it, so that it was very clearly to be seen as not a Ukrainian venture, but an international venture that recognizes the significance of the conflict that Russia has brought, and that it is not a war that is only being fought by Ukraine, but that it is a war that is being fought by the international community and that impacts everybody. And so that, I hope, answers your question, and I'm obviously happy to answer questions relating to it.
So more of a hybrid approach.
A hybrid or internationalized, I think, I mean, truth be told, I think the nomenclature can be misleading in these circumstances. Nor do I actually think the nomenclature can be helpful in terms of what this actually means. What this means, and you can call it whatever you want, really, is an institution that emerges from the strongest legal basis possible, which is Ukraine's jurisdiction, but that has the widespread international support through not only, obviously, its composition, but also in terms of how it is accepted by the international community.
Well, it's a very good explanation. Probably some of the best we've heard in a while. So thank you for that. We're going to turn now to Ambassador Clint Williamson, who's currently serving as the lead coordinator, something you've heard about tonight, the joint EU, UK, US Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group for Ukraine. He's the former ambassador at large for war crimes, EU special prosecutor, UN special envoy, and too many other positions to mention tonight, since we're already going long. But I also do want to say that He is senior coordinator. He's here at Georgetown, senior coordinator for international justice and affiliated with the Center for National Security at Law. So welcome, Clint. And please explain to us about this mechanism, the ACA that we've now had referred to twice, and how it works both on international and domestic fronts, and how will it operate with respect to atrocities in Ukraine.
Okay. Thank you, Milan, and thank you to the Embassy of Poland, Vital Voices, and my colleagues here at Georgetown for sponsoring this event. The situation in Ukraine is unique from an accountability perspective. For the first time ever since the advent of the International Criminal Court, we have really the manifestation of this concept of complementarity that we have not seen in other situations. The more common scenario have been places like Myanmar or Syria, where there is neither an international process for accountability or a domestic one. In those countries, they're not states parties to the ICC. Russia or China have blocked referrals to the ICC, and there's no domestic accountability process because the governments themselves are complicit in crimes. Here in Ukraine, we do have the International Criminal Court exercising jurisdiction, but its ability is somewhat limited just by its global mandate and its resources. The ICC generally has prosecuted no more than 5 or 6 people in any given situation around the world. They're dealing with 16 other situations right now. Even if they triple that in Ukraine, we're talking what, maybe 15, 20 people that would be prosecuted. If a special tribunal for the crime of aggression is created, it also will likely have limited reach, maybe dozens of people, maybe 100. When you look at the scale of crimes that have been committed in Ukraine, that leaves hundreds, if not thousands, of other perpetrators that must be dealt with. And they will be dealt with through the domestic justice system. So what we are doing through the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group is trying to assist the domestic system in investigating and prosecuting these crimes. As Ambassador Gupta mentioned, as Nima mentioned, the State Department is supporting this in the strongest way possible. We have $20 million in funding that is committed to this. And it's a process that has been ongoing since the very beginning of the war. On February 23rd, 2022, I was at home in Washington, woke up that morning, had a number of text messages, urgent messages from Irina Venediktova, who was then the prosecutor general, asking for an urgent phone call. So I got up, did a Zoom call with colleagues in Ukraine, and she said, "Can you come out here and embed with us and show us how to do this?" They knew what was coming. I mean, up until that point, I think many in Ukraine, many in the international community had been very sanguine about the reality of a Russian invasion. That morning, as I watched her and colleagues on the screen, and their faces were ashen, their hands were shaking, they knew what they were facing. But what they were asking for was very specialized help in dealing with war crimes. Ukrainian prosecutors are very capable. They are extremely competent. They have resources. They have a system that's rooted in rule of law, in a democratic state. But like most prosecutors' offices, fortunately, they have not had to deal with war crimes domestically. So they needed help in this specialized area. I went out a week after the invasion. We started working in a small village called Krasichin in Poland near Przemysl. And I'm sorry to my Polish friends if I butchered those names. But anyway, within 8 days after the invasion, we started meeting with the Office of the Prosecutor General. They came across the border. We started working with them on how we could help and started bringing out prosecutors, investigators, analysts with whom I had worked at the Yugoslavia Tribunal, who I knew from other courts. And this is what we have done since that time. We have a robust roster of international experts that we're rotating through Ukraine regularly. I just returned from Kyiv yesterday. I was there for 10 days. This morning, I had first meeting with colleagues there, and as we heard earlier, it was interrupted as people had to go to the shelters, and we could hear the booms in the background. This is a common occurrence and something that we're dealing with, but our Ukrainian friends are dealing with every day now for 2 years. But this initiative, it started out as a U.S.-only effort in February, March of 2022. It was joined by the European Union in April, and then by the United Kingdom in May, and which culminated in a joint statement by Secretary Blinken, High Representative Borrell, and then Foreign Secretary Truss, launching the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group as the official mechanism of these three governments to assist Ukraine, to make sure that these close allies were speaking with one voice on accountability, that we were coordinating our efforts, making sure that we were assisting the Ukrainians as effectively as possible. And I think we've been able to accomplish that. So we're working in two main areas. One is trying to help the Ukrainians with their current investigations and prosecutions. So we're working hand in hand with Ukrainian prosecutors, helping them as they build these cases. The other area is we're trying to help these Ukrainian institutions create the structures, the policies, the practices that will sustain them for years to come. As we have seen many times over, these crimes are not going to be dealt with in a year or 5 years or even 10 years. So we need to help the Ukrainians to be in a better place to deal with this for decades to come. And we're trying to do that. Just the last point that I would make is when I had this first meeting with our Ukrainian counterparts, again, March 3rd, I think, of 2022, one of the first things they asked me was, what advice do you give us right now? What do we need to be doing today? And I said, well, one of the things that you need to be doing is developing contingency plans. What happens if Kyiv falls? You need to make plans for getting files out, protecting witnesses, making sure your staff is protected. And all the Ukrainians at the table, they didn't quite laugh, but they said, Kyiv's not going to fall. This was at a point when the Russians were surrounding it. I think all of our intelligence services were saying it's just a matter of days, a week or two. But to them, this was not a possibility. And it's this indomitable spirit which has kept them going, which has inspired the world, which I think inspires us every day as we work with them. And I think it's critical that we continue this support from all of our governments. As someone mentioned before, we certainly need our friends down at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue to do their part in this. And we need to maintain this common front on accountability. It is a critical factor going forward, and it's something that we all must invest in and see through.
Thank you so much. And you can see the extraordinary extent of what this undertaking requires. I have several rounds of questions here. I'm bagging them to give you all a chance to ask them questions. I know we're running late, but there must be questions that some of you have, so let's take a few before we move on. Anybody? Okay, here. Jillian?
I'm Gillian Hubner. I lead the Collaborative on Global Children's Issues here at Georgetown. And last week we had some of the Ukrainians frontlining the child protection work, specifically focusing on the 20,000 plus children who've been forcibly deported, the largest missing persons case since World War II, which is not getting enough international attention. The mechanisms that have been set up on global child protection are clearly broken. I'm curious how that piece of work is being prosecuted in in your area. Yeah.
Good question. Is there another? Okay, well, let's take that. Who wants to respond? Feel free.
I can respond. I mean, obviously not in the context of prosecution, because that's not what our office does. I mean, I will highlight that the ICC's first arrest warrant did focus on the displacement of children. But on top of that, this is an issue that our department cares deeply about. In fact, one of the ventures that we fund through the department is the Conflict Observatory. And the Conflict Observatory, for those who aren't aware of it, is a consortium of organizations which do open source investigations and then compile reports. And one of the most important pieces of work that they've researched and artifacted and reported on is the displacement of children, because of how significant it is, because of how coordinated it is, because of all of the elements of Russia's infrastructure that have been dedicated toward not only the aspect of displacing children, but then obviously passportization, altering their citizenship, and so on. So through that effort, we have tried to support bringing and shedding light to this phenomenon, because it is quite a significant one. And then obviously in supporting investigations done by the ICC, since they focused on this issue as well.
Just on, and hi, Elaine. I'm sorry, I unfortunately was not able to make it to this because I was in Ukraine, yes. But the Office of the Prosecutor General also has a very strong emphasis on this. We have a joint working group with them involving international prosecutors, investigators, and analysts, and their prosecutors and investigators from both the State Security Service and the National Police who are looking at this. I think the one thing that I would say is right now, we still don't have a very good idea of the scale of this problem. There are so many children that are unaccounted for. It's unclear how many of them have been abducted, how many of them, just have vanished for whatever other reason at this point. And so it's really the unknowns, I think, at the moment that are very, very challenging here. All of us want to get a better grasp of this problem, at least, first of all, to determine the scale of it, and then trying to get at the root of it. The ICC investigation, I think, has already made significant progress, but they are very determined on the domestic level as well to prosecute people for this, and are trying to put as many resources as they possibly can toward that end. And I'm sorry, I omitted one thing when I was describing ACA, which I have to mention considering where we are. Georgetown University is the lead implementer of ACA. So it is this consortium of 3 governments, but is being implemented by 5 non-governmental actors. And Georgetown is the lead. So in my role as Senior Director for International Justice here at Georgetown, I'm heading up this effort. It's the first time ever that an academic institution has done something like this, something this operational, conducting this huge initiative in an ongoing conflict, deploying people on a daily basis out there. But it is something that I think may very well be a model for the future as we find it harder and harder to find consensus in the international community on accountability mechanisms, particularly through the UN. These type of more innovative approaches will be necessary.
And your students will have a lot to learn in the future.
Absolutely. Yes.
Any more questions? If not, we want to thank our panel and for their expert advice. I think they made us all a lot smarter. And as I said earlier, I hope it moves us to greater action on this issue. There is a reception for anyone who wants to stay. We hope you'll stay, continue the conversation. And I want to thank everybody.
And, if I may.
Yes?
Just, I would like to add something for your wonderful
I
statement.
thought you were saying you didn't have anything to add, so please do.
So only 5 minutes, I promise. I appreciate all efforts, especially from academic centers, because it's additional value to the effort to hold accountability Russia.
And I know you're a professor as well, so.
Yes. But I treat it naturally because I dealt with the history of Second World War and the post-war justice, so naturally I just treat it as an extension of my interests. But I'm thinking about the title of how to hold Russia accountable for the war crimes in Ukraine, and I think that the first condition is that Ukraine should win the war. This is absolutely first condition. How we can punish Russia if Ukraine is now in very difficult plight? I mean, and I would like to call to everybody sitting in this wonderful hall that the Ukraine need help. Ukraine need military help to win the war and to hold accountability. I don't know who, because I would like to say that political leaders, but it would be difficult. It would be difficult even punish those soldiers who committed a real crime on Ukraine. And support Ukraine, provide military aid is our first duty. And please don't treat this war, that is not our war. Yes, it's our war. Because Russia is very dangerous, because Russia threatened the other NATO states, like Baltic states, like Poland. If we analyze the all atrocity committed in Ukraine, I'm sure that if they cross the border with the Baltic states or with Poland, they will behave exactly the same and even worse. It is not a chance, forget about it. This is the absolutely strategy. And so, I think that the previous generation of United States politicians won the Cold War, and they wish United States of America win once again.
Thank you for that, and it's truly our call to action tonight. It's why Ambassador Makarova is up on the Hill. We have a lot of work to do, and so we will go forward. And I know many of these people will continue to pave the way forward for accountability. So thank you all for coming. Thank everyone who helped us get to this place tonight. And please stay on for some snacks and libations. Thank you.